All right, guys. So we're doing the series on technology and the effect that technology has on us and our relationships with other people, our relationships with our neighbor, our relationships with God. And so this week I want to talk about a reflection on technology and what it means in terms of inequality and how it shifts the power dynamic between people. And so, first question I have is, why do human beings like technology? Like, why do we actually like technology? What do you think? Why do we like it? Because it makes life easier. Okay, good. Any other ideas? Why?
It can be fun.
It can be fun. Good. CJ, what do you think? Why do we like technology?
More addictive.
What's that?
It's addictive.
It's addictive? Okay. All right. So I want to... Yeah, Steve.
Easy access to information.
Easy access to information. Okay, great.
Power?
Okay, power. Yeah, good guess. Yeah. So what I want to submit today is that we like technology because it increases our power, right? And this is very broadly defined. So the Bible talks a lot about human will, for good or for ill, right? And so power is the ability to exert our will over something, over a process, or even over other people, right? Powers are the ability for us to exert our human will over these things. So over an object, process, or over other people. So power to do what? Right? Power to do what? All right. So it could be a lot of different things. And so, of course, I'm an economist, so I'm going to have some geeky graphs up here. Hopefully they're not too intimidating or anything. This is something in economics that we just call a production function, which is the most simple model that students learn like in the first week, where you have some input, which we'll call like human effort in this case, and then some output, which could be some benefit that you're trying to produce, some level of productivity. You know, if it's a person working in a firm, some level of accomplishment. You put in effort, and then you hope to accomplish something. So it'd be some level of accomplishment. It could be entertainment. It could be gossip. Okay, I want you to think sort of really broadly here. A certain amount of effort that goes into gossip, right? And the more effort you put into gossip, the more gossip you get. We're going to see how technology affects this. It could be harm that you want to do to somebody. It could be destruction. If we're talking about say, military effort, for example, right? So what does technology do? With a low level of technology, we can put a certain amount of effort into an activity, and we'll get more and more, say, productivity, but at a diminishing rate. So one of the things that econ students learn about at first is law of diminishing returns. So you put more effort into something, and you get more productivity, but at a diminishing rate. But what does technology do? What it does is it shifts this curve up from the blue curve to the red curve, so that with any amount of effort that we put in, we can get more of whatever our goal is. Right? Whether it's productivity or entertainment or whatever, we actually get more, kind of a bigger bang for our buck in terms of effort. So if our will is to eat, technology increases our ability to eat for any amount of effort that we put into getting and preparing food. So if our will is to move our physical body from point A to point B, technology increases the amount of benefit that we get from any amount of effort into choosing to move ourselves. If our will is to negotiate a higher wage, technology is going to allow us to do that because it makes us more productive. If our will is to threaten someone with violence, okay, technology in the form of weaponry increases our ability to exert our will in that way too. So I want you to think of technology as really, really broad and something that can that's going to be a complement to our effort in those kinds of ways. What are the different kinds of power And how can these different how can these different kinds of power be affected by technology? So let's look at military power, first of all. So we're going to look at power in sort of all these different contexts. We're going to focus on economic power and how that produces inequality, but let's look at military power. So different levels of weaponry allow certain countries to exhibit dominance over other countries, right? So for the United States, having toys like this allow us to, political scientists would say it allows the United States as a country or a selected few other countries in the world to project power around the world. Right? There are very few countries that can project power around the world. Well, how do we do that? Well, part of it is largely, it's through things like aircraft carriers and super high technology jets. Okay, that can allow us to project power around the world. So technology allows us to project power. Some of you may be familiar with Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel that he wrote about 20 years ago, where he talked about, part of what he talked about is why did history play out so that the Europeans colonized the Western Hemisphere as opposed to, say, vice versa, or Asia colonizing Europe. And one of the things he talked about is the early evolution of tool making in Europe, which was used to make weapons ultimately, which allowed Europeans to project power around the world in very early stages. Right? But that happened through these nascent forms of technology, just sort of basic military weapons. Technology also affects power in relationships, doesn't it? Some of this power can create more equality, and some of it can create more inequality also. So it's interesting how the power dynamic has changed, for example, with Yelp. Have you guys noticed this a little bit? We have this ability to rate companies and then have their ratings online, so there's this statistic that's floating around there. 86% of people will hesitate to purchase from a business that has negative online reviews. So notice how this kind of shifts the power dynamic a little bit toward the consumer, right? I remember that when we were leasing our car, and we were in Nevada, and this guy was just trying to give us. He was just playing all these games with us, and we were trying to. He said we had one car. Oh, we don't have it, but we have this more expensive one, and this kind of stuff. And I mentioned the word Yelp, okay, and all of a sudden, ding! Oh no, we have this less expensive option for you that has more benefits on more options on the car than you even wanted in the first place, right? And so it was like, here's this review from this nice restaurant. The chicken they use is from Popeyes, right? Can you imagine? Can you imagine, being the owner of this restaurant and having this comment sort of thrown up on the web? Right? If I could give a half star, I would. I love dive bars, but this place has a terrible vibe. So this shifts the balance of power a little bit in a way toward the consumer. And same thing with Amazon and eBay and Craigslist. Right? We have these star rating systems where it actually this sort of change in power holds sellers accountable. Right, in ways that they might not have been before, but it's through this power that technology gives. So what about power in relationships? Right. So one of the things that technology does is it allows us to broadcast our brags and our accomplishments. Right. So you have like the proud parent whose kid graduated from Harvard Law School, who kind of put that up there, just in case you're unclear if it's law, they have law. and then we've all seen these sort of Facebook brags, like projections of self, like our increased power to project self. So this is from Amelia, name blotted out. Robert has been teaching Montana how to work his United States of America puzzle. Today, Montana worked the entire, in caps, puzzle by himself from start to finish. If you're not impressed, then either A, you're jealous, or B, you have no clue what a 2-year-old should and should not be able to do. Right? And Marcella says, that's so awesome. I was like 6 years old when I did mine. Go Montana. Right? So technologies like Facebook allow us to project give us the power to project an image or the kind of self that we want to other people to see online. This little character says, "I must remember to tell everyone about this banana." Right? So power in relationships, right? It affects power in our relationships. So now I forget the numbers. Maybe somebody knows the percentages now. People that actually meet their spouse online now.
It's over 50%.
Is it? Yeah, I was going to say. I thought it was over 50% now in the United States. 50%. Right? Yeah. So technology affects power in relationships in some really interesting ways. So one of them is just through the commodification of potential mates, right? So this is eHarmony, I think, or something like that. And there are tons of them. Chemistry.com, eHarmony, Match Affinity, ExactMatch.com. There are a ton of them, right? They realize there's this. People aren't dumb that are in this kind of business. They realize there's a ton to be made from a good online dating platform. So you have all these choices. What do you think that does to relationships? What do you think that does? Help speak. Anita and Aaron, what do you think? I'm next to a lot. Diana and Jeremy, a lot of our friends met online. But I mean, I guess just the potential to sort of scroll through these people, these human beings that are potential mates, scrolling until you find the perfect one. But what actually happens when we select somebody? They're always imperfect, right? They're always probably somewhat, disappointing, kind of relative to the profile they wanted to project, right? And so part of our, except for Anita, except for they're always outliers. But it makes us think about relationships in a different way, doesn't it? It makes us think about who can please me, which one of these people can please me the most, rather than just the commitment that's involved in just working on different stuff in a relationship. And also, even when you're, maybe these guys met online, but do they look like they're having a good time together? I mean, they look like they're having a good time on their phones. But even just the technology that's available, and I'm not just talking about cell phones, but even sort of Netflix, and right, isn't it just super easy when people are dating, or even when they're married, maybe more when they're married, to just stop looking at each other and talking with each other, because you have this alternative entertainment source that is always contesting the relationship, right? It's in economics we call it in game theory we call it a reservation payoff, or the best alternative to an agreement, or kind of coming together. So in the context of a relationship, let's suppose there's kind of a quiet moment. Maybe looking on a phone is preferable to sort of the quiet moment, so people turn toward the phone. But then what does that do to the relationship? I think of when, so you guys know I started this new job with the Westmont College campus in San Francisco, and it was really interesting. We had a freshman orientation there, just for a week before they went down to Santa Barbara, and so they all came in, and it was so sad to me in a way. There were these guys and these young women that came and they sat in the parlor, and instead of just back in the 80s when I started college, it'd be like, whoa, exciting, fun, new people to meet and talk to, and they all just sat there with their phones, silent, like a group of them in the parlor. It was like their little security blanket, because I think just the shock of being in San Francisco, or just, I don't know what it was. It's just they kind of just reverted to the security of their phone rather than just the little awkwardness of the silence, right? And maybe these guys are working through some kind of issue that makes it a little bit harder to talk to each other. So it's easy just to revert to the phone instead. All right. So let's talk about. So we talked about military power in personal relationships. What about economic power? So if a person possesses the ability to understand and interact with a powerful technology, it adds to your power. It adds to your economic power. So in Shrewd Samaritan, I have this quote that comes from Claudia Goldin and Goldin Katz, who are two labor economists at Harvard, that say modern inequality in rich countries is driven by a race between education and technology. Okay, and the race in inequality or equality is driven. It's driven by this race between education and technology, meaning that if education is able, broadly based education is able to keep up with technology, what would that tend to foster? Like people's ability to interact with that technology. If a lot of people can do that, that would tend to foster what? Equality or inequality? Or equality, more, right? And if only just a few people can keep up with that technology, interface with it, understand it, use it in a productive way, what would that tend to promote? Inequality. Yeah, we tend to promote inequality. So when we look at the United States and we look at the annual income share of the top 1%, this is what the graph looks like. And this actually comes out of, this data comes out of a book by Thomas Piketty, which is probably the best-selling economics book of the last 10 years. It's called Capital in the 21st Century. This is his really famous graph that he puts in. It's a time series graph of this annual share of the top 10% of total income in the U.S. You can see, like, back kind of in the robber baron days, it was really high. It was close to 25%, so it was like 24%. And then the Great Depression hit, boom. World War II, then tax rates were really high, and we spent a lot of taxes on building educational institutions. You think of most of the UCs, the universities of California, and the California state system was built right in here. You can tell because the buildings are so ugly. You knew they were built in the 50s and the 60s. And in fact, we did a really, really good job. So Goldin and Katz argue that actually even sort of post-Civil War, the United States did the best job in the world of having education keep up with technology. A really, really good job. The rate of high school completion went from, in 1870, it was about 3% of the U.S. population, 1870. About 3% of people in the U.S. graduated from high school. Can you believe that? 97% did not make it out of high school. By 1970, it was almost 80%. So it's a big jump, right? And the kind of and that was really appropriate to the level of technology that we had, which required much of it required a high school education. And the rate of college completion dramatically increased during that time too, and that's continued to increase. High schools actually remain stuck at roughly 1980, 1970 levels. But what they argue, what actually happened in the United States is at this point we stopped those huge increases in education. Think about how many UCs have been, or how many were built. Universities of California were built in here, and the answer is like 8. And how many have been built since?
1.
There, 1, Merced. Yeah, and same with Cal States. A huge number of Cal States were built right in here. Population of California has continued to increase. How many have been built since then? A handful, like 3 or 4, out of like 30 something. So, and in terms of per pupil spending, like even for K-12, it hasn't kept up. And so what they argue is that this increase in inequality that we've seen, which we perceive as we look out and see the tents in Berkeley and in Oakland and in San Francisco, and people saying, where do we live? Have you guys seen that? Like when you go to school, where do we go? Where do we go? And that's the question that all the commuters get to see, on the side of the tents, heading to San Francisco. What they would argue is that education has not kept up with technology. And so you have this big increase in inequality. It's not just what we perceive. It's actually what's true. Okay, so if you possess this ability to understand and interact with powerful technology, it adds to your economic power. So it adds to your power to ask for more compensation for what you do, and you can do that because you are more productive. right? And when we're talking about wages, people are generally paid what they produce, and as far as we can measure that in kind of dollars and cents. And if you have this ability to understand and interact with modern technology of different forms, you get to take home more money. That's the way capitalism works, right? That's the way our system works, and that's the way our system is going to work. Okay, people have the freedom to pay you what you're worth, and you have the freedom to accept that job, and you also have the freedom, hopefully, to invest in your own ability to interact with this technology. But if you're able to do that through reasons within and outside of your control, you can demand more compensation for what you do. You also have, if you can interact with technology, you have the power to have people actually listen to your ideas too. This is one thing I noticed, and maybe this is bias coming from academia, but if you, I was giving a talk at Compassion last week, and I'm just starting to learn the very basics of machine learning, and that's what they wanted to hear about, is how to apply machine learning to analyzing development programs, right? And just the fact that I knew a little bit about it, even though I haven't actually used it quite yet in my research, people will actually listen to those who have this ability to interface with technology. It's just kind of the way the world is. You have the power to understand the world in different ways and to take leadership in it. So think about like even something as simple as Wikipedia and just having essentially the world's knowledge in your pocket. Right? When in human history have we ever had anything close to the power of the knowledge of the world, even minute? I use it for understanding the most minute details in econometrics are on Wikipedia. And I'm sure like programmers like Steve, you probably use it to some extent to like look at things. Oh, I think I learned that one time, but like, what is that again? Somebody mentioned that. What is that again? Right? So for people who are wanting to accumulate knowledge, it helps us to understand the world and how different things in the world work, and then to take leadership in the world. So it allows us to because it allows us to command these scarce resources, right? It allows us to be more productive. It allows us that salary that we get from being able to do that allows people to do different things that other people can't do. Okay, so people who can interface with technology, whether it's digital technology, biotechnology, other forms of technology, tend to earn high salaries. And so it allows those people to, for example, place your kids in select colleges. So what does that do? That ability to interface with technology allows you to hire tutors for your children, for the SAT, allows you maybe to put them in private schools, which allows them the knowledge and education needed to access forms of technology, which keeps the cycle going, doesn't it? And what we see in the U.S. is that 50 years ago, there was this idea that the U.S. was a place where anybody can make it, that there was a lot of upward mobility in the U.S., but now it's actually much lower than in Europe. It's actually much lower. So there's a lot of what we call like intergenerational transmission of wealth and income and inequality. It allows for spots in inexpensive sports clubs. Now I'm putting this up again just because of my own experience. I find this really, really interesting. So in the Bay Area, when Allie goes around and plays her tournaments and games, like in Marin or in Moraga or in Dublin, what we notice, and I think you've probably seen this too, sweetie, is where are the best clubs? Whenever we have to play a club in Danville, I'm always nervous because they're always really, really good. Why? Because they have the resources to have these great soccer trainers that are there, right? Or in Marin. They have these resources to put into that. In the United States, you find these pockets where people are able to interface, have the education to interface with modern technology that filters in even to seemingly kind of mundane things like the quality of their soccer clubs. But La Marinda Soccer Club is just over the hills, and it's the best one in the Bay Area. It costs, what is it? It's like $5,000? It's like $5,000 a year to put your kid into it. But they almost guarantee that your kid will get a college scholarship. Okay, and they're very selective about who they take also. But you can sort of see how this perpetuates inequality. Whereas what's interesting is soccer in other countries, they don't do it this way. Kids just play on the street. And so the people that rise to be professional soccer players in places like Brazil come from very humble backgrounds, typically. Whereas in the United States, if you look at the men's and the women's World Cup teams, they tend to be from upper middle class backgrounds, which is actually, they say, is really bad for U.S. soccer. But you can trace a lot of this back to economic power and interface with technology. It allows you access to the ear of political power, right? It allows us access to scarce goods like housing. And this is one of the things I want to focus on, because as Christians, I think we're as concerned or more concerned than anybody in this town about housing and what the effect of technology has been on homelessness. So I was with my Westmont students at St. Anthony's Dining Hall, where they do kind of a spiel on homelessness. So I'm going to throw out a couple of rather remarkable statistics, I think, that one of which they gave there, which is that in 2016, they do a census every July with about the number of people sleeping on the street in San Francisco. And in July 2016, there were 7,300 people sleeping on the street in San Francisco. Outside of the shelters, outside of anything. They did it in 2019, and this is during a time of unprecedented economic boom in San Francisco. Unprecedented. Unemployment in San Francisco is 1.8% right now. That means if you have a pulse, you can get a job, okay? Especially like in retail or something. Anybody, I can say this almost certainly, if you have good soft skills, meaning like you don't lie, cheat, and you show up on time, you can get a job in San Francisco. So unemployment is 1.8%. Salaries highest they've ever been. Help wanted everywhere. Homelessness went from 7,300 3 years ago to 9,500 this last in 2019. And the question is like, why? And it's because homelessness is one of the very few manifestations of poverty that is not caused by poverty. It's caused by prosperity. And homelessness in San Francisco is caused by changes in technology, essentially. Probably 90%. Okay? The changes in homelessness is caused by innovations in technology and the inability of the market to supply more housing. Right? And so people who have the ability to understand and harness these new technologies where we live have more economic power than those who have not mastered these technologies. That's just a fact. Okay? And it's because because the technology makes people who have the ability to understand the technology so much more productive. They can command 6-figure plus salaries and outbid people on the lowest part of the housing rung. So you can think of in places like San Francisco and Berkeley, there's a housing ladder, right, where at the top is like the nicest house in the hills, right? And then you have this kind of ladder. And what's at the very bottom? What do you think is like the bottom rung on the ladder? Like a one-bedroom, like an old one-bedroom cockroach, lots of roommates apartment in, say, San Francisco or Berkeley. That would be the lowest rung on the ladder. Okay, so the thing is, even like a college grad with very little experience, but with the ability to interface with technology, can outbid the person that is on that lowest rung on the ladder. Now the market's a little sticky, right? Because rents are a little sticky. It's not like you have a bidding war for every apartment. But market prices will adjust in a market economy so that these guys will outbid this guy for that lowest rung on the ladder. Right? And then we'll sort of move up. And that's exactly what we've seen in Oakland. So where we see all the tent cities in Oakland under the overpasses and along the highway in Berkeley, essentially what those are people who have been knocked off the bottom rung of the ladder, and because of just different issues in their life, different mental illness, veteran status, PTSD, whatever, it makes it really hard for them to get a job, and the support that they get from other people, whether it's the government or family or friends, isn't enough to keep them on that bottom rung of the ladder. And so they drop off. And the market would like to supply little tiny houses that don't meet certain codes for those people. The market could crank those out for a couple $1,000s a piece, but we have regulations that say that you can't do that we require a certain standard for housing, and you combine all that together and you get homelessness. So I told you I'd give you some graphs. So this is a supply and a demand graph. So this is and I'm just going to some people have seen these, some people haven't seen these, but I think it illustrates homelessness in the Bay Area really well. So I'm going to torture you with this graph. So a supply curve just shows how much people. This is apartments, and let's just talk about small, kind of the lowest end apartments in San Francisco. This is the number of apartments, and this is the rent for apartments. And this shows this curve. This blue curve says that when the market price goes up, that more apartments will be supplied, which we see in Berkeley as the price has gone up. There are new complexes that have been built. And the higher the prices, the more and more of those apartments will be supplied. Okay, but notice this curve is really steep, meaning the price can go up, but not that many more apartments are going to be supplied, right? Just because of regulations and different things. And then here's the demand curve, and what this shows, and this is really the key one here, it shows the willingness to pay by different people for a small apartment in, we'll say Berkeley. So some people are willing to pay a lot. Some people are willing to pay less. And think of willing as willing and able. Okay, so people are willing and able to pay something, a certain price, then they will pay it. Right, if that price is below what they're willing and able to pay. So economists construct a demand curve by just lining up all these different willingnesses and abilities to pay, all the way down here for the person for an apartment that's hardly willing to pay anything. So before the technology boom, we had rents that were here at R1, and so don't worry about A1 and A2. So at R1 there were this many apartments that were in equilibrium in the market, and this was the rent. And then what happened when Twitter formed 7 or 8 years ago, and then Google moved into South of Market, and Uber and Airbnb and all the tech companies. So what happened is that there were a bunch of people, there were this number of people that were willing to pay more for housing than the people that were there. And so that shifted, at any level of rent, it shifted out the demand curve for people for rent. And so now the rent is at R2. Okay? And all of these people, notice all of these people that were willing and able to pay this much, what happened to them? They just got outbid. They got outbid for apartments. And so these guys, this group of people, are homeless unless they get out of the market, unless they move. Okay? And they're homeless because the willingness to pay for those apartments is up here, and they were willing to pay this much. And so they're out. And so these are the guys that are in, and these are the guys that are out. And in is a little bit more than out if the supply curve has some positive slope to it. But that's basically the story of housing. And it has to do, again, with technology and the economic power of people who can actually understand and interface with technology relative to people who, for many different, very good reasons, often aren't able to do that. It simply increases their power in the market. Okay, so there's another reason that technology creates inequality, and it comes from this really interesting paper a couple decades ago by this guy named Sherwin Rosen. It's called The Economics of Superstars, and it's one of the most interesting and highly cited articles in this area in economics. And one of the things that they talk about is how technology and the ability to broadcast talent inherently increases inequality. And so back in the Middle Ages, this is what sports and entertainment looked like. Okay? So here you have the the court jester, the fool that entertains the nobility. Right? You have the harpist. Here you have an early precursor of the Beatles over here. Here's Simon and Garfunkel, and here they're one of the biggest sports then was jousting. And here you can see this guy breaking his lance on this guy's poor face over here. But people would gather together just like we gather together to watch football or soccer or baseball or basketball to watch people jousting, right? And these guys were great athletes, like of their time. But what's interesting is even the very best, like let's say that these guys were the very best singers in medieval England, or pick your European country. And this guy was the very best fool, okay, in medieval England. They didn't, like the very best, like think of it as the modern day equivalent to Adele, okay, or even Simon and Garfunkel. Could they command a very high salary? Or working conditions? How come, Melissa? What do you think?
Well, like you were saying, they're not as well known, so there's not as much competition among the nobility.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, they didn't know about them. They would actually travel, right? Because one group of nobility would get sick of this guy, so then he would travel, and they were usually traveling troops that would sort of go around, right? But there wasn't the ability, even for the very top singers, to broadcast their talent, right? And so I was actually compared to today, and so it's actually really interesting. I was actually really interested in this and sort of how technology has created this change. And so I was doing some research on it, and I ran across this really interesting article. I was interested in like what was the life like for a court jester, like what they call a fool back then, like the guy who's on like the deck of cards with the bells on the hat. Like what was life like for even the best fool back 800 years ago or whatever? So there was an article in BBC History magazine about what life was like before technology grew to the point today, about the best entertainer. And so it was called A Medieval Fool's Life. And I'll just read it to you. It says, both King Edward II and King Edward III had a succession of fools and called them all Robert, regardless of their real names. However, by the 13th century, some talented jesters were beginning to achieve superstar status. Those who were lucky enough to be employed by royalty were provided with their own horse and servants. Tom the Fool performed at the marriage feast of Edward I's daughter Elizabeth and was given a fee of 50 shillings. This was a fortune since a skilled thatcher, which is like somebody who builds thatch roofs, I think, could expect to only earn 2.5 pence a day, and you could buy a goose for 1.5 pence. But being selected as the personal jester of a medieval king or a nobleman came with a serious health warning. Jesters were often required to go to the battlefield with their masters to carry messages between the leaders of warring enemies, demanding that a city surrender to a besieging army or delivering terms for the release of hostages. Unfortunately for the jesters, the enemy did sometimes kill the messenger as an act of defiance, especially if they regarded the terms being offered as an insult. And some used a catapult or a trebuchet to hurl the unfortunate messenger or his severed head back to his own camp as a graphic illustration of what they thought of the message. Right? So here's the point. So here's the point. Even among the superstars back then, the terms of their contract weren't that great, right? Obviously. But so who are the superstars now? Right? And so this is a list of athletic, movie, singer superstars. We got Lecrae, we got Messi, we got, what's his name for the Angels? Mike Trout, we got Oprah. Okay? So the terms of their contracts, Steph Curry makes $43 million a year. Oprah's richest woman in the world, at least by her own income. Lecrae, super rich. Mike Trout has the highest Major League Baseball contract. Messi, highest soccer contract, right? So these guys get great terms. And what is it about technology that allows them to have these terms? Well, Messi's games are broadcast all around the world. He can create a winner it's not that he uses modern technology that much, although he might a little bit in his training. It's that technology allows him to broadcast himself sort of over this large space. And same thing with entertainers. And this even started, inequality with technology started, not with the internet, but with the earliest recording. So there was an African-American gospel singer back when they first started doing recordings, and I can't remember her name right now, that was really the first person to kind of like promote her voice in places where she wasn't present physically, and there's this interesting early accounts of how she accrued this income from being able to do that. Okay, which is just amplified by technology now. Okay, so it may even be true, and this is something to reflect on. But imagine if technology is continually growing, right? But I think many people would believe that the deeper technology gets, the harder those skills are to acquire. Like think of back 5,000 years ago when they were just not that far back. Say 1,500 years ago when they were just using a plow. How hard was it to learn to use a plow? Like how many days did it take to actually learn that technology? And that was the highest technology available in an agrarian society. Well, not that long. But now, how long does it take to do something to learn artificial intelligence? It takes a lot of training to learn AI. It really does. I mean, you need sort of years and years of mathematics and statistics to kind of build up to the point where you can do that. Well, let's suppose people are heterogeneous in their willingness to subject themselves to that kind of torture of learning this more advanced new technology. I mean, I find it in my field all the time. It's like sometimes people talk about some neat new thing, like in machine learning. I'm like, oh gosh, like now I got to learn it, right? And it's just a hassle, right? But I wouldn't be able to learn it unless I sort of knew what I knew now. And so if I were starting from scratch, it'd be even harder. But imagine that technology is always increasing, but people are heterogeneous in their ability or their willingness to adopt technology. Then you might even make the case that technological change is in itself a continually driving force for inequality. You guys get my argument? Right? Like if the hardest technology becomes harder and harder to learn, then technology itself may be a continuing force for inequality. This is balanced a little bit by the fact that technology in some ways can level the playing field by, for example, allowing people like in Etsy to sort of sell things online that increases their productivity with a minimal amount of investment in the technology, which may counteract this a little bit, but I still would say that this could be true. Yeah, Rich.
So you up there you said ability, but then when you were talking that people might differ in their ability to learn technology, but you said willingness. I think it really is ability. I think technology has reached the stage where it's like sports. Some people literally would be unable to learn it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and maybe it's hard. I think it's hard to sort of find that out to know whether it's ability or whether it's willingness. I think in many cases it's kind of a combination of the two. If something is really hard for somebody, it's just so torturous to kind of keep trying to do it that they're unwilling to undergo that.
But is there any reason to think it isn't like sports? I mean, that they're...
Yeah, that's a great point.
That as you say, the population is heterogeneous.
Yeah.
And at one end, there are people who can do it, and at the pinnacle of that, there are people who can do it really well.
Right.
But that's a small percentage of the population. Yeah.
And the applications of technology produced by that small percent feed down to a lot of different people, right? And so, you can kind of see the inherent inequality. Okay. So at this point, I've hardly said anything Christian, and so now's that time to think about. I want us to think about. So I think we're all on the same page in terms of technology increases our power to do things as humans, like whether it's military, whether it's in personal relationships, whether it's economic power. And so I want to focus on the Bible doesn't really say, like, this is how you should deal with technology, but it does talk about what we should do with power and about our wills, right? Remember, our will is power is the ability to exert our will over a process, over an object, over in our relationships. So the question is, what did Jesus do with power, with the power that he had? Which I think can give us some clues about what we can do with our power in terms of our ability to interface with technology. So in Philippians, Paul says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. I love that phrase, and I think it speaks into our world today. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. That was how Jesus dealt with his power. What else does the Bible have to say about how God wants humans to use power, or how God views power? Micah 3:8. But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord. So our power, ultimate power, actually realize comes from the Spirit of the Lord. And with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgressions, or to Israel his sin. So part of it is using our power to help people be reconciled to God. Luke 9:1 says, when Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. Right, so again, using power for healing and reconciliation. Acts 1:8 says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. So power to become witnesses. Right, power to become witnesses, power to hold people to account, power to heal. Are biblical ways to use power. So I have a series of questions that I'd like you to break up into small groups and talk about. But all of this, I think, should revolve around the theme of technology gives us power. Okay, if we agree with that, how do we use that power? What is a biblical use of that power that technology gives us? So why don't we break into groups of maybe like 3 or 4, just kind of the usual size, and then spend the rest of the time talking about these discussion questions.